Set. We are
All
live
right.
on Zoom and live on YouTube as well.
All right.
All
Well,
right.
hello, everyone. This is our first Anti-Psychopath Political Action Committee town hall. And we have with us, who will be joining in just a few minutes, Dr. John Gartner, a prominent psychologist who has been at the forefront of bringing uh, Donald Trump's psychological conditions to the public mind. I'm just going to talk just very briefly. I think most of you probably know all about Psychopath, or else you wouldn't be here, but I'm going to tell you about what the idea was and a little about the origin and what we've done so far. And then we're going to let John talk, and then we're going to answer lots of questions, which I think have been sent in that my colleague Riley is going to pose to us on your behalf. Basically, the idea, I mean, I've been banging this drum for a number of years that Trump is a narcissistic psychopath, a narcissistic sociopath, malignant narcissist. There are all different phrases that overlap that really describe him. He is a pathological narcissist within the meaning of the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the 5th edition. You have seen me hold out the cards and go through each of the diagnostic criteria one by one. If you haven't, if you've missed it, I've posted those any number of times over the last 5 years. He's also a sociopath, and a sociopath is someone who has absolutely zero conscience. It's manifested by the fact that he is a pathological liar, that he uses aliases to just so from time to time to describe himself, that he has absolutely no remorse, no conscience, that he assaults people. He does all sorts of very bad things because he just doesn't treat other human beings as human beings, and he doesn't respect them. And that's all also consistent with his narcissism. Everything is about him. And so that's why fundamentally he's unfit for, to be dog catcher. I mean, he only cares about himself. He doesn't care about the public that elects him and that he is supposed to be serving. He doesn't care about the Constitution that he would be called to uphold once again, which he did, under the Constitution if he's elected president. He not only failed to uphold the Constitution when he was president, he actually tried to overthrow it and would try to overthrow it again. He's a man who said that he wants to suspend the Constitution because when it doesn't suit him, he doesn't like it. Of course, because it's all about him. He's willing to take immunity from the Supreme Court, whatever he can get from it. But he's not willing to give anything back. He's not willing to commit himself to the rule of law. He's not willing to commit himself to be the president of all the people. He's only in it for himself. And that's basically it. And he tells endless lies, and he's a narcissistic sociopath. And one of the ways that you know that he is disturbed is that it's very easy to get under his skin. Narcissists are very, very weak people at bottom. They pretend to be tough, but they're actually very weak. They cannot take criticism. And one of the things that we've all learned, and I learned this early on in 2019 when I started pointing out his narcissistic sociopathy, was that he gets very sensitive when you criticize him. He responds. I mean, he claps back, which is kind of stupid. He did it to me in March 2019 when I started tweeting out the diagnostic criteria for narcissistic personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder. He started attacking me as being the husband from hell, or he said all sorts of choice things about me, which was really stupid because he should have ignored me. He should have ignored me. He should have just basically just said, oh, he just sloughed it off and ignored it. But instead, he amplified it. And that's what he does. When somebody writes a book about him that's critical of him, he criticizes the author and sells more of that person's books. He's done that endlessly. And now we're seeing it in this campaign. And this is part of the object of Psychopath. We're seeing him respond to the criticisms, which are very valid criticisms, responding very weakly instead of talking about things like the economy and the things that his advisors want him to talk about. So, as part of a long experience with this, I mean, I thought that, it would be a great idea to actually have a PAC that was designed, a political action committee that was actually designed to illustrate and point out his psychological conditions. And one of the reasons why it's necessary to do that, which is one of the reasons why actually I had to do it instead of I mean, the doctors did it, but the press wouldn't cover it. And I fancy myself a little bit skilled now at getting this into the media because I've been talking about it for so long. I thought, a PAC would be a great thing to do. And so the object of the Political Action Committee is fourfold. One is it's to explain Trump's psychological disorders to the world, to the electorate. It's to explain why those psychological disorders render him unfit for duty, unfit to serve as president. The third is to finally get the media to start talking about it, and we're making some headway there. And the fourth is to basically provoke him into manifesting those characteristics. And I think we've achieved some success. We have definitely gotten on his radar screen. It very much annoys him that we're running these ads. We run these ads basically, a lot of them, we just run it in Mar-a-Lago and we run it at Bedminster so that he sees them and he responds to them. He tweeted at us, he tagged us the way he also attacked the Lincoln Project, which, where we first did the audience of one thing 4 years ago, these audience of one ads. And the best moment was when in the launch video, if you go back to our website, I did a launch video, 3-4 minutes, that was longer than it should have been, but I thought it was pretty good. And one of the things I talked about is how Trump's narcissistic sociopathy, his personality disorders is what they're called under the DSM-5, the pathological narcissism and the antisocial personality disorder. These personality disorders not just define him and not just render him unfit, they kind of explain all of his conduct and misconduct in particular. They explain, I said, why he worships authoritarians and gets along with dictators. It's why he is authoritarian in nature. It's why he is a misogynist. It's why he is a racist. It's why he is a criminal. All of these things go back to his narcissistic sociopathy. And lo and behold, a couple of weeks ago, before the Democratic convention, he was giving one of his rally speeches in a very small venue in Asheville, North Carolina. And he started talking about how he gets along with Kim Jong-un and how he gets along with Vladimir Putin. And he said, some people say that's a personality defect. That's us echoing in his head. And so we're going to do more of that. We've got a lot more coming. We've run ad campaigns directed at his slurring of words that drove him nuts. We've run about an ad campaign about his small crowd sizes, and that's clearly something he's sensitive to. We put up billboards talking about how he cheats at everything, including golf. And we put up billboards, saying that he is what he is. He's a criminal, and we, we put a big billboard right up by Palm Beach International Airport. Can't miss it when you're going from your private plane to Mar-a-Lago, and it says, "Welcome to Mar-a-Lago, home of the felon." And we're going to do more of that and more of the videos. And I don't want to spoil any secrets. I don't want to spoil the surprises that are about to come, but we got more. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. John Gartner, who is a longtime practicing psychologist affiliated with the Johns Hopkins University. And he has really been talking about this for a number of years. And he played a big role in, there was a great movie, I commend it all to you to watch it, from 2020. Played a starring role in that documentary called Unfit, which talked about Donald Trump's, guess what, narcissistic sociopathy. And I give you Dr. Gartner.
Thank you, George. And really, thank you for all that you're doing. You talked a lot about the history of how you got involved in this. When you were on our show, on our podcast, Shrinking Trump, you talked about the fact that really there's two groups of people who have identified dangerous leaders like Donald Trump. I thought you put it very well. One was historians like Ruth Ben Guyot, and the other has been mental health professionals. And specifically, actually, historically, it really began with one mental health professional that I want to focus on, a famous analyst named Erich Fromm. Many of you have probably heard of him. He's one of the founders of humanistic psychology. Well, he himself escaped Hitler. And it stuck with him. He wanted to explain the psychology of Hitler and other grandiose, murderous, mad dictators like him. And so he came up with this formulation of malignant narcissism, which actually has 4 components. George mentioned 2 of them, narcissism and sociopathy or psychopathy. The other 2 are paranoia, his constant sense of being aggrieved, of being a victim, his conspiracy theories, his demonization of minorities and immigrants and anyone who doesn't agree with him. And then finally, the 4th component is sadism. And this is very, very important because at a fundamental level, a malignant narcissist is someone who is destructive, who wants to destroy, who gets a sense of almost orgiastic pleasure from feeling a grandiose sense of destructiveness. And really, any of these leaders have always, in the end, destroyed their own countries. The reason that I was actually aware of his work was just, I sometimes liken myself to the fictional character Randall Mindy in the movie Don't Look Up. He's just a nerdy guy, doctor with his own area of research. But because of that nerdy area of research, he's the first one to see that there's a meteor, a planet-killing meteor heading towards Earth. Well, in the 1980s, when I was a young man, I trained with the world expert in malignant narcissism, Otto Kernberg. And at that point, it was actually an obscure historical diagnosis that people didn't use very often. But because of my nerdy expertise, I realized, oh my God, there's a meteor, a planet-killing meteor heading towards America. So I did get involved, as George said. I started an organization called Duty to Warn. We did try to get as much attention with the press and with the public as we could. We did the movie, #Unfit. By the way, the sequel, #Untruth, is coming out this weekend. But as George is pointing out, we've been banging on the door, but we've been getting resistance from the mainstream press for really covering this story. And sometimes it's really been extraordinary. It's been amazing how the press has normalized the most grossly dangerous and pathological behavior. So what's exciting to me about working with this PAC is it's a chance for us to do something about that and get this message to the people who really need to hear it. So the group we really need to hear it, obviously, are the sliver of persuadable voters in swing states. And so by putting up billboards and running ads, we can reach those people because we're breaking out of the normal social media bubble. We're not in their little bubble, but if they're watching TV or they're driving a car, they're going to see this message. And one of the things that I think is so powerful about reaching people with this message is George has made a very good point about political messaging. I've learned a lot from him about political messaging. And one of his points is the best political message is trying to convince someone of something they really already know or believe. For example, when they were branding Biden as old, people felt, well, he was old. So it resonated. Well, people really do at some deep level understand there's something wrong with this guy. Even a lot of the people that are voting for him realize there's something disturbed about him. It reminds me of the Goldwater Johnson race where the knock on Goldwater is deep in your guts. You know he's nuts. I think that's really true about Trump. So this advertising campaign will resonate, and it really could bring in an important sliver of voters. The second goal that he talked about is finally getting the mainstream media to report on this story. And I have to say, no one has done more than George in that area. If you watch cable news, you've seen George talking about this. They talked about the phrase, the full Ginsburg. That's when Clinton's lawyer went on like all the different talk shows. And I think they're going to have to rename it the full Conway now because he's appearing on so many shows. But finally, what's really fascinating to me is this third goal that George has had this theory for a long time, that as a bully who's also a thin-skinned narcissist, he can be provoked to react in ways that are against his interest, that reveal his pathology, and that show him being off-kilter and erratic, and also put him on the defense. If you have to be explaining that you don't have cognitive decline, then you're losing. And so while the wise thing would be to not react, he's not capable of not reacting. And so what we're doing is kind of hoisting him on his own petard. By provoking him in this way, it's getting him sort of undone and also to reveal his pathology. But also, we know that he has to react. So, for example, we had now, as I look at this in some ways as a psychologist, as a psychological experiment, we've got an independent variable beaming these ads into his clubs, and then we've got the dependent variable seeing how he reacts. So, for example, when they beamed an ad about his cognitive decline into his clubs, he wrote a very angry post about George, calling him Mr. Kellyanne Conway, and saying that how dare Fox show this garbage. So we know he saw it. That's important. And then the next day at his rally, he's saying, they say I have cognitive decline. I don't have cognitive decline. Well, reminds me of Nixon saying, I'm not a crook. If you have to deny that you have cognitive decline, you're kind of already losing. And George gave you the example of us talking about the personality defect. That was immediately after a commercial comparing him to these historic dictators was beamed into his club. So it's working. And the other thing that's so gratifying to me about this, well, first of all, it's just gratifying to, feel empowered to get under his skin and to put him on his back feet. But the Kamala Harris campaign has picked up on this strategy, and they now too are needling him and ridiculing him and provoking him about his crowd size, about other things, and it's working. I think that's the important thing. George has identified a strategy that is actually working. So those were all the remarks that I had to make.
Well, I'd like to think that I gave them the idea. I think they also figured it out a lot on their own. But I think one of the things that we do that helps them is that we create running room for them, because we're out there, I'm waving these cards with the DSM criteria on MSNBC, and they can go out and say weird, which is basically code for what the more complex message that we're sending out. But we're protecting their flank by going out there and pushing the envelope and talking about this in more explicit terms. So, may everybody get into the act. I love that the Lincoln Project's been doing it. I really love how the Democrats have finally really taken to just needling him, getting under his skin. I mean, you see campaigns do that from time to time, but it's usually not directed at the psyche of the opposing candidate. It's usually just, a lot of it's just fun. A lot of it's trying to just get attention. But this really gets under his skin. And one of the problems he has is he doesn't have a coherent message to start with, and he's certainly not going to be able to establish one if he keeps talking about whether or not he has personality defects, whether or not he slurs words, whether or not he loves dictators. I mean, all of these things. There's one. My ex-wife used to quote Mario Cuomo, and say that the one thing she remember Mario Cuomo saying that really was important in politics is that you don't repeat the criticism when you're criticized. I mean, there are ways you have to play defense sometimes, but you don't go out there and mouth the criticism so that you amplify what the other people are saying that's bad about you.
Right. I'm not weird. I'm not weird.
I'm not weird. I'm not weird. I'm not cognitively declining. I don't have a personality defect. He can't help it. The more you hammer at him, the more he talks about it. And I think part of it is because deep down, I mean, one of the things about narcissists is, pathological narcissists, is they're projecting a false front. And deep down, they know it's a false front. They're trying to convince themselves and the world that they are greater than they actually are, that they are more stable and more genius than they actually are. That, Trump's been talking about how hot he is lately. I mean, this incredible false front that he has to maintain to actually, it's not just to get elected. It's not just to get people to cheer for him. This is part of his own essential mechanism to defend his own his own psychological integrity. It's what holds him together. And if you start jamming at that, you can cause a person like him to fall apart. And when things start going bad, they fall apart. And that's, I think, part of what we're seeing here. I mean, we've gotten to the point, and we talked about, Erich Fromm and how he got into the idea of malignant narcissism because he was studying Hitler and Stalin and Lord knows who. I mean, there's part of me always thinks of, when I think of Trump and the malignant normality that has been created around him, where all of these things that he does that would be absolutely deadly to anyone else, all the talking about Hannibal Lecter, talking about electrocuting and sharks and whatever, that would be fatal to any other candidate. But he's created this normality where it's, oh, that's just Trump being Trump. I mean, I think of the movie Downfall, which is about the last 10 days in the Fuhrer bunker, and the weird normality that they had, where it was perfectly normal for them to be hiding in a bunker, worshiping this one man who has basically brought destruction to his country, with the Russians a few blocks away shelling them. I mean, the guy was moving around divisions on a map that didn't exist. Okay, and that's where Trump is headed. And we want to help him get there as soon as possible. Anyway, so let's, we've enough yapping from us. We were supposed to do a half hour of yapping, but I think I don't want to start saying things that people have already heard. I want to get right to the questions, if that's okay. And Riley, do you have the questions?
Yes, I do. First off, thank you so much, everyone, for joining and submitting questions. We got hundreds of questions submitted, so we will not be able to get to everyone's. But to start with something pretty newsy, it was recently reported that Trump's campaign is running ads in Florida, in Mar-a-Lago. What do you make of that?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was going to bring it up. What George was saying about how Hitler needed to be surrounded by all these flunkies who created this false reality for him. So now, to counteract George and the Lincoln Project's ads that are depicting him as bad, they've taken up a collection to beam ads praising him into his clubs, just to counteract the narcissistic injury that the psychopaths and Lincoln Project's ads are causing him, which I think is hilarious.
Right. I mean, it's not like Florida has been deemed to be a swing state, or Palm Beach County in particular it's not. These are all audience. They're running their own audience of one ads, and they actually did that 4 years ago. The Lincoln Project had started to get under his skin. And what happened was the Trump campaign actually took out ads during the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl, national ads. You don't run national television ads in a presidential campaign, because only like 7 or 8 states matter. But they blew $10 million to buy a big spot on this during the Super Bowl, the most expensive television advertising you can possibly buy. I mean, insane. Anyway.
All for his ego.
All right, next question. Do you believe that Trump has any understanding that most of what he says is complete lies, or does he believe his own lunacy?
That's a really good question. I'm going to defer to our psychological expert.
It is a really good question. It is a really good question, and it's one that isn't always clear. My colleague Lance Stoda says there's 2 types of lies Trump tells: those he tells others to deceive him, and those he tells himself. And at a certain point, those lies become delusions, I believe. That, in other words, he literally convinces himself. George Costanza on Seinfeld said, remember, it's not a lie if you believe it. So he convinces himself. I think he actually convinces. People have talked to him and said, no, he actually thinks he won the election. But that's a delusion. A delusion is a rigidly held belief that is not amenable to reason or facts. So it is actually, at any given moment, hard to tell where he is on that spectrum between pure lying, trying to convince himself, and actually being delusional. I think he slides up and down that spectrum very fluidly.
I agree with that, and I'd put it slightly differently to add to the mix. I don't think he's capable of making distinctions between truth that he likes, lies that he wants people to believe, misconceptions that just float around in his head, and all sorts of other factoids and things. I think it's all just a big mush pile, and he just pulls out randomly at any given moment whatever it is he wants to spout out to whoever the audience is at a given moment. I mean, does he really believe, for example, that the crowds that Kamala Harris got in the 5 or 6 rallies she held just before the Democratic National Convention and right after she became the presumptive nominee, is he really saying those were all artificially generated by computers. I mean, he said that. Now, does he really believe that? When he was pressed on it, he kind of demurred later. Does he really believe that people are going to believe that? It doesn't. I just don't think it matters to him. And when you call him out on lyings, he just tells another lie. He just goes all over the place. I don't think he cares what I don't think his mind really distinguishes between what's true, what's factually true, and what's false. I think it distinguishes between what he thinks helps him or assuages his ego at any given moment and what does not.
I think that's right. And I would add one more thing that I actually forgot to mention, which is we've also seen great evidence of cognitive decline in him that we've been talking about for a long time. And we've been talking about a lot on our show, Shrinking Trump. And the thing is that adds a whole other component, which is that he also, I think, in his more demented moments, does something called confabulation, where he actually has gaps in his memory. And so the mind just fills it in with stories that aren't really lies. They're really they're made up. They're not stories you're making up intentionally. Your mind is filling in gaps to try to make sense of what's going on.
Yeah,
so
for us, for the rest of us, they're just little gaps. For him, there are these big gaping holes in the Swiss cheese of a brain that he has.
Exactly. So when he was at Gettysburg, for example, he goes, Gettysburg, wow. Because one of the things people who have dementia do is they just speak in superlatives. It's amazing. It was incredible. It was really something. And I really think he didn't know what Gettysburg was. At one point, he's looking at a hill and he goes, Robert E. Lee, he said, never fight uphill, me boys, never fight uphill, in an Irish accent. But he's looking at a hill. He's making this up. But the point is, the difference between, say, that and saying that Kamala's crowd size is fake, obviously he has a real clear reason for wanting to convince people that Kamala's crowd size is fake. He has no reason to make up this crazy story about Robert E. Lee. I think it's really his mind just filling in gaps. So I think the only thing more dangerous than a malignant narcissist with the nuclear codes is a demented malignant narcissist with the nuclear codes.
Yeah, and it's also important to remember he didn't have much up there to start with. Okay, I mean, one of the points that it's a subsidiary point, but one of the points that my friend Justin Frank, he's a psychiatrist, a Harvard-trained psychiatrist who wrote a book called Trump on the Couch, wrote that in like 2017, is when you are a pathological liar like Trump, it debilitates your ability to think. This is even apart from age-related cognitive decline. You cannot think the way the rest of us have to think because you're just making shit up all the time.
Yeah.
And so it's debilitating. It's like it's intellectually debilitating just to be making up lies left and right because it's a substitute for actual thought, actual reason, actual empirical measurement and understanding of the world. And another point about it is that no, I forgot. I'll skip the other point. We'll get to it later.
Okay. How can people get the media to cover Trump's mental unfitness for office?
By talking about it. And that's what we're trying to do. We're going to talk about it. And we're going to talk about it, and we're going to cause him to behave more like that. And sooner or later, we're going to force them to really, really talk about it. And they are talking about it in sort of guarded ways. They're talking about weird. They're talking about, they are talking about him behaving quite oddly, that he can't focus. They're saying that his advisors can't get him to do what he needs to do. And that goes to exactly what we're talking about. And I think, as the weeks go on, I think we're going to be able to drive the point home. And I hope that we can, frankly, for the longer term, we can educate the public so that we never have a guy like this again.
How should Kamala Harris communicate with Trump in the upcoming debate they are scheduled for?
She should be, okay, there's one. The principal problem that one would have when debating Donald Trump is to deal with the fire hose of lies. And we saw Joe Biden try to do that. And I think, yeah, he is old and he is a little bit slower than he might otherwise, but I don't think he was senile or suffering from dementia. I just think he was over processing what he was hearing. and trying to figure out, okay, which of the 17 lies that I just hear should I respond to and in what order and with what points? And if you start thinking like that, you're effed. I could use the word. You're screwed because there is no way to it would take you hours. And to respond to each one of those lies, it's like you're chasing rabbits around. What they say in litigation is you can't be chasing rabbits around the courtroom. You have to stick to a few main points. And that's what you have to do is basically just say he's lying, pick a lie and say that's a lie, and then go on the attack.
Mm-hmm.
And the way to attack Trump is not to be upset, but to roll your eyes at him and mock him.
Yes.
That will make him crazy. And that, especially, I was like, I think the Harris campaign is totally onto that because they want the mics unmuted.
Exactly.
They want those mics unmuted. He's
Right.
going to lose his shit. The Trump campaign wants Trump's microphone to be muted between answers because they know whatever comes out of his mouth isn't going to be good. So I think, what she has to do is she can't respond to every lie. She has to call him out for lying, give a couple of examples, and basically say, are you okay? Do you need to talk to someone? I mean, really just treat him like the crazy man that he is. And, if it involves some cackling, she's got this great laugh, that'll just drive him nuts. And another reason why you have to do it that way is from the other standpoint of his followers. His followers like him because he pisses off liberals. He pisses off his enemies. And they don't like Trump's enemies because they're their enemies because they perceive those liberal types of people who Democrats and media types as acting as if they are above the masses. And so they like it when Trump pisses them off, when those people off. They don't like it. It doesn't really help them. It doesn't make them feel strong and secure and allied with this omnipotent leader if that omnipotent leader is being mocked and laughed at. And that's another reason why, what she has to do is, she has to ridicule him.
I agree with you,
in a clever
George.
way and in a humorous way.
Absolutely. And that kind of goes against Democrats' DNA. We're the nice guys.
Well, you also like to talk about policy. I mean,
and we love to talk about policy.
Policy, and if we have this law, we can make a perfect world. I mean, you guys, you candy ass liberals. I mean, that's what you do.
Well, and that's actually one of the ways Biden was misprepared for the debate. He came up with they had him cram for the test, and he had 17 policy experts brief him, and he said, point number one, policy number two. All of that doesn't work either. So I agree with you. You can't respond to the lies one at a time because there's too many. Then you're on their ground, as you say, repeating their words. You can't get mired in policy. I think you have to have punchy lines that are both ridiculing and memorable and aggressive and that are funny and powerful. And you're right.
We're going to turn you into a political consultant yet, Doctor.
And because remember, his key thing is strength, right? And actually, that's why Biden was losing, in my view. If you look at the basic Drew Weston, who wrote The Political Brain, he's a psychologist. He consulted with the Clintons, and he said we basically have a chimpanzee brain, okay? And if you remember Planet of the Apes, when Koba and Caesar fight for dominance, Caesar's obviously a good leader, and Koba's obviously a malignant narcissist. But the apes are just going to watch and see who wins the battle. Whoever that is, that's our boss. That's the new leader. Because that's the primitive programming that is deep in our brain. Because if our leader's more powerful than the other leader, we survive. So when it looked like Trump, we kept saying, he's bad, he's bad, he's bad. And everyone's, yeah, he's bad, but Biden is weak. So bad, Trump's weak.
Be interesting to talk to, evolutionary psychobiologists, if there's such a thing, where basically there were two, one way humans have survived is by cooperating, and which requires empathy and understanding and treating other people with fairness, And then the other way is just brute force. Our guys are meaner and ready to kill more people than the other guys. And that's the battle. That's the psychological battle that is waged both on an individual level in each mind and on a societal level and a global level. And we're trying to get to, what the object should be is we're trying to get to the, we're trying to evolve ourselves into not needing to kill everybody to survive. And to do that, we got to get rid of people like Trump. How's that for philosophy?
Well, and it is rooted in evolutionary biology because there's a difference between within group behavior and between group behavior. Within group behavior needs to be more cooperative, but if the other tribe is going to kill you, you want a strong leader. And that's what demagogues do. They split a society into us and them. So you feel like they're coming to get us.
Yep.
And so we need him to protect us. And that's the scenario that he creates.
Yeah, and you talk to somebody like Ruth Ben-Ghiat, basically the playbook. We talked to Timothy Snyder, all these people who, all these social scientists and historians who write about fascism and authoritarianism, and I recently did a forward for the reissue of a book by Dr. Stephen Hassan, The Cult of Trump. That's the essence of cult leadership, is you people here in our Jonestown camp are the anointed ones, and everyone else, we don't want their influence. Inside groups versus outside groups. Anyway, next question.
All right. In what ways has Trump's mental instability and mental health issues influenced his policy decisions and his interactions with foreign leaders during his presidency and, his endearment towards these dictators?
Well, I think it's had lots of effects. He pursues policies that he perceives not necessarily to be in the public interest. Maybe sometimes it is. He does things for his own benefit. To go to the domestic front, the most recent perfect example was comprehensive immigration reform, the Langford bill, the bill that was basically drafted, with the consent of conservative Republican members of Congress, that Joe Biden was ready to sign, that increased border protection. It was a normal. Republicans viewed that as a victory. They won, and Trump said no, because Trump didn't want to take that issue off the table. Trump didn't want the Democrats to get the political bump of triangulating their way into policy that Republicans would agree with. Okay, and that's completely self-destructive. It shows you that he does not care about the things he purports to care about, things he talks about. He only cares about what's good for number one. To talk about his relationship with foreign leaders, they have him down to a T. They think he's as John Bolton says, they think he's a laughing fool, and they know how to manipulate him. The Japanese prime minister, allies even do it. Macron talked about, let's have a parade. Let's have a big parade. He knew Trump would like a parade. And Trump, all of a sudden, this was 2017, 2018. So all of a sudden, Trump wanted to have a parade, a big parade down Pennsylvania Avenue and Constitution Avenue with tanks and everything. And they said, sir, the tanks will really screw up the roadway, and we'd end up having to repave all of Washington. So they know how to manipulate him, and one of the things I would love to see someday is when all these archives of we'll probably be dead by then, but maybe they can preserve our bodies so that we can wake us up and show us this. I want to see the archives of all the foreign intelligence agencies that did profiles on Donald Trump. I remember in particular the incident that occurred with the British ambassador, whose name I forget, the prior British ambassador. He had sent secret cables to Whitehall, basically talking about Trump being cuckoo and how he's so easily manipulated and how he's a weak person, and it was meant for very, very senior people at the Foreign Office and for the Prime Minister, so that it was basically his observations of Trump after a year and a half. And somebody in London leaked it to the British press, and Trump basically demanded that the that the British would call their ambassador, and the British did. They have to have somebody in the United States that Trump was willing to deal with. So it really does affect our foreign policy, and in particular with regard to the dictators. I mean, he wants to be one. These birds of a feather flock together. He wants to be Kim Jong-un. He loves the fact that Kim Jong-un, has absolute fealty. I mean, it helps that you can say Kim Jong-un once had his uncle executed with an anti-aircraft missile. But that's good for him. To Trump loves that. Trump doesn't care. Trump has no humanity. Trump wants to be like Putin or Kim Jong-un.
And I also think in a more concrete way, I agree with everything you said about the psychology, but in a more concrete way, I think we just have to recognize that Donald Trump is on Putin's team. He has been from the very beginning. I mean, there's absolutely no question. I don't call him even a Russian asset. He's a Russian agent. Basically, in his view is the view of a criminal, right? A criminal gang. And so Putin is the boss of bosses, but then Donald Trump is the oligarch that in charge of America. They divide up the territory. But the problem with these criminals is they divide up the territory, but then they end up fighting over the territory, right? There's a famous principle that democracies don't attack democracies, but autocracies do, and autocracies attack each other. So if Trump were to be reelected and to become the Russian autocrat and oligarch of America, now you'd have a gang of warlords. You'd have a gang of dictators running the country, dividing up the world. I'm sure Trump would let China take Taiwan, and he would already said that he's not going to do anything to stop Russia if they invade Europe, because they haven't paid their dues. Putin will know he doesn't have to worry about nuclear retaliation if he goes into Europe. And so what's going to happen? Eventually, someone's going to push the button and we'll have nuclear war. So I really think people really need to see the big picture that when dictators rule the world, it's perpetual destruction and war.
Riley, another question?
As someone who is exhibiting these narcissistic and sociopathic traits, how do you think Trump will react if he loses the election in November?
Well, I think he is not going to react well. He is going to claim that it was stolen from him, and he's going to do the exact same thing he did in 2000, and he probably will do it in a more desperate fashion, in a fashion that he'll probably be trying more explicitly and more forcefully to provoke violence, because this is his only shot at staying out of prison. Remember, he is not just running for president, he is running to stay out of prison. And this is his last chance. And I think that's why we're seeing him deteriorate, is that he doesn't have any more moves to play. And so I think we're going to see a lot of bad things between now and January 20th. And I hate to say that. Somebody who just made that point just the other day was Dr. Alan Francis, who was a prominent psychiatrist who helped write the DSM-4. He basically said Trump is a malignant narcissist, and he's going to lose this election. And when he loses, he's going to try to foment violence. And that's the reason why Dr. Francis said he needs to be beaten soundly. And the Democrats need to run up the score on this guy and not let up. And I think that's the attitude that they have. They really, obviously I'll take a victory by this much, but it would be best for the country if Trump is completely trounced in a manner that really, that is incontestable, even by the most insane people on the planet who will be supporting him.
And he's always fomenting violence. I mean, the way he responded to the assassination, they basically said it was planned by the Democrats, which then, of course, pushes, it's called stochastic terrorism, if any of you aren't familiar with that term, but stochastic terrorism is when you just keep putting out hate messages till finally one unstable person says, I hear you, Donald, I'll do something about it. And so he's putting out those messages, and it's, remember he talked about a Second Amendment solution to Hillary Clinton. He's been putting out those messages for a long time, but I agree with you, they will escalate.
All right, we're going to do a couple more questions here. What do you think gets under Trump's skin the most? Like, what do you think makes him the most crazy?
What makes him the most crazy are the things that he knows he is not, but he wants to convince the world that he is, that he's stable, that he's a genius, that he's skilled, that he's good looking. All of these things, everything that you hear him talk about when he flatters himself, that he's the richest man, that he's the best businessman, every superlative that he ever utters about himself, and it's just endless. I mean, it's almost anything, because he claims to be basically, he claims to be, he was Major League Baseball material. I think he basically is claimed to. He claims, he's the greatest golfer. Well, if he's the greatest golfer, why does he need to kick people's balls into the rough, and take 20-foot gimme putts. But he basically, anything that calls into question his competence, his ability, his psychological stability, all of these things cut to the core of his sensitivity. That's why, he deep down, he doesn't believe that. That's why he is a narcissist. That's why he's always trying to reassure himself and others that he is better than he actually is. And so when you talk about anything, virtually any criticism that has some truth to it, and all of these criticisms have truth to them. I mean, it's not hard. I mean, there's plenty to basically dunk on Trump about, it gets under his skin. But I do think that particularly the calling his, he's a guy who had to cheat on his SATs by paying someone to take his SATs for him. And he's the guy who claims to be like the smartest person ever. When you challenge his intelligence and his competence and his stability and his, that's when he gets the most upset, I think.
Yeah, we call it in psychology a narcissistic injury, when something injures your narcissism. And like you say, he's fragile. And so he can easily collapse, and he has to be the best at everything. Like you said, I remember there was one reel where he says, I know more about nuclear science than the nuclear scientist. And I know more about, the environment. And he went through like 20 different professions where he knew more than the experts. He said that he's done more for Black people than Lincoln. And then he said, I've been the most popular president since Washington. And I was waiting for it and waiting for it. In fact, more popular than Washington.
Nobody has ever done more for the latest one. Nobody has ever done more for Christianity or for religion than Pope Donald Trump.
And so,
what about Moses? Where's Moses? I mean, where is Moses? Who's done more? He said literally, like, no one's done more for the Jewish people. It's like, okay, there are, there's a list of people I could think of, Golda Meir, Moses. Who's for me to say? I mean,
right. But I think this thing about crowd size is really hitting his sort of manhood at a very deep level. I really think he has crowd size envy. We were joking about that on the show.
That was the most amazing moment in the Democratic convention. Was Barack Obama saying he's really obsessed with crowd size?
Yes. Thank God Barack Obama didn't go high. He went low, finally.
That was narcissistic injury inflicted there.
Yes.
What are your plans for the Anti-Psychopath PAC from now through the election?
I don't want to give away the store, but we're going to be talking about, some of his crimes. That were not necessarily charged as crimes. I mean, he's assaulted people, let's put it that way. And we're going to be talking about that. And he's not going to like that. It's already cost him $88.3 million. So we're probably going to talk about this. I don't want to give anything away, but that is something that's reflective of his sociopathy, and it causes him great narcissistic injury to be confronted with his behavior. We've got some other stuff too.
Yeah. So one question we got from a lot of people was, why are so many people still willing to support Trump? How can they not see the issues with him? What do you guys make of that?
I think there are a lot of different reasons. I think, first of all, look, I think there has been this conservative right-wing, it's not even conservative, it's just lunacy, this media bubble where people cocoon themselves into hearing lies, and they want to hear the lies, and it's soothing to hear the lies. That and there's also a part of it is that there is some kind of chemical reaction in the brain. And I think that when people feel that they are being persecuted and they have to band together to fight the enemy. And I think there's a lot of that. There's this kind of addiction that a certain segment of the public has from watching Fox News and Newsback, or reading Breitbart, all of these things that people on the right have been feeding the base over many, many years, to the point where you have to keep dialing up the dosage in order to get a rise. And I think that's part of what happens. I think Donald Trump rode that into office. I also think that, there's the part of the thing is that part of the situation is that the people who hold power or influence in the Republican Party have, those would include elected politicians, party functionaries, political consultants, donors. I think they've created a monster that they can't control, and they're terrified of it. And then there's also part of it that people don't want to admit error. It is painful to admit error, particularly when it's a big error. And what Trump has done, I mean, it's sort of like what former FBI Director James Comey said. He eats your soul. Trump eats your soul bit by bit by bit. And it can be quite gradual for some people, but when it gets to the point where, what's he going to do next? Is there anything that he can do that will make you realize that you've made a mistake? There isn't any, because it's like you've already accepted so much. And that's why, I misjudged what would happen after January 6th, 2021 myself. I thought, oh, this is it. He's finally gone too far, and people are going to abandon him because this was just clearly too much. And the reality didn't happen. Who did we, there were only like 10 or 11 members of Congress who voted to impeach him, only, a handful of senators. And some of them have kind of taken it back already. Basically, we got to Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney, and not a whole heck of a lot more.
Right.
And it's just astounding. And and there's always this endless excuse making, which drives me nuts, particularly on people I know well, where basically it's just not his fault. He just listened to the wrong people. It's like, he chooses to listen to people on the basis of what he wants to do. That's one of the things that they get, some people let him get away with, is that, somehow he has some lack of agency, that he's not responsible for himself. Well, no, sorry, he's an adult. He may be a lunatic, but he's an adult, and he's responsible for his actions. He should be held responsible for his actions, and the best way to hold him responsible for his actions is that he should spend the rest of his life in the prison for all of the crimes he's committed.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, everything that you said. And in this new movie coming out, #Untruth, and the first one, #Unfit, we focus more on his malignant narcissism, and #Untruth, it's more about these social processes you're talking about how social media and the news bubble has basically been able to create a false reality for people. One of the things I think we've learned in the Trump era is how fragile reality really is. How people can really be convinced that, he didn't kill 1 million people in COVID. He didn't lose the election. He isn't working with Vladimir Putin. He didn't steal documents. I mean, these things that are so blatant and so like they're not just an elephant in a room, it's the whole circus in a room that we're managing to ignore. And, it's really interesting. There was a lot of psychological research after World War II dealing with this same question. How could normal people believe all this stuff? And there's a famous experiment called the Asch experiment, which some of you, I'm sure all of you that took intro psych learned about the Asch experiment. I'll just remind you very quickly. The Asch experiment is they bring a subject into a room, and there's 3 lines. 2 are short and 1 is clearly longer than the other. And they say, which one is longer? Okay, 100% of the subjects get it right. No one ever gets it wrong. Then they repeat it. They have 2 Confederates in the room who insist that the shorter one is longer. I mean, what are you going to believe, right? Your eyes or these 2 people you just met, okay, in this room? And a third of the people changed their vote. that they say the shorter one is longer because they get just because other people are saying it, so it must be true. Take that one, and then these people you just met. What if everybody you know in your church or in your group, okay, is watching Fox and they're all consuming the same reality? You can change reality, and that's something we've learned, and we have to really take a lesson from that. All of this propaganda could destroy our society.
Yeah, and it's been compounded, I think, by the fact that we have so many more sources of information today than, say, we had 50 years ago. I mean, 50 years ago when I was growing up, we had a couple of newspapers, a local newspaper, a regional newspaper. I didn't really read the New York Times. I was Boston Globe, the Marlborough Enterprise in Marlborough, Massachusetts, and we had basically channels 4, 5, and 7, and ABC, CBS, and NBC, and that's where we got our news. And now you got Facebook and Twitter and this and that and TikTok and infinite ways to get information that are not equally valid and not equally accurate. And some are, some are really just some are just lies intended to inflame, to get clicks. And, people
I'm as old as you.
People have. Oh, okay. I'm going to write that down. That's an important admission. We
that wasn't my main point, but okay.
All right. Well, no, okay. It wasn't your main point. No, I get that. It wasn't your main point. But, people are overwhelmed by the amount of information they have. So it's easy. It's easier, more easy than ever to basically just say, I'm just going to listen to one source, one man. He's my truth. And that's sort of the terrifying consequence of having so much information, true and false, at our fingertips. I mean, I always, I would have thought 25 years ago, if you described as the internet was kind of getting into vogue, that this is amazing. You can, I can be walking down the street and I can learn, if I want some obscure fact about the Taj Mahal, I could just look it up, and while I'm crossing the street, I could learn something. It's like, that's amazing, but the downside is there's also just shit out there. And that's what a lot of people are choosing to consume, and that's very, very damaging to our democracy. Well, I see we've somehow managed to consume the hour, and that we have allotted to us. And so
I'm going to jump in here with one last question, George.
Okay.
People really want to know, what can our viewers do to help your efforts and to help the PAC?
Well, help the PAC is, contribute. We have, we're raising money. I donated $343,434.34. That's because he was convicted of 34 counts. Other people have been giving $34.34. Some people give $343.43. And give, we're very focused. I mean, one of the things that's great about this PAC is we know what we are doing and what we're going to do. We want to drive this fucker nuts. And if you want to drive this guy nuts and make sure that he self-destructs, or at least do our best to try to make him self-destruct between now and November, click. Don't, just every little bit helps. And I was really gratified. I mean, it's kind of touching because I went to our offices, Riley's office, which we use as a base, and people had just mailed in checks. Like, they don't click. So some people don't want to click, and they mailed in checks, and we had like this whole pile of checks with all these great notes and everything. And it was really kind of heartening that, people really care, and they care about their country, and they care about the message that we're trying to convey. I just want to thank everybody for their support. I thank for just, even if you don't give a dime, that you're just listening and telling people about what we're doing, and telling people the guy's nuts, and it in your guts, to borrow that phrase. I mean, that's what you can do. Okay, just spread the word. If you can spare some change, that's amazing. And we hope to do more of these town halls as we go along. We hope to have more to talk about, and I think we will. And again, thank you everyone for joining. I really, really, really appreciate it. It's just moving that we got such a great response.
Well, I just also want to say I'm very proud to be working with you. And, in the movies, psychologists are always portrayed as these evil figures with these nefarious plans. I've never met a psychologist like that, but I feel like with your help, George, I'm becoming one.
Yeah. Yeah, psyops. You're
Psyops.
become
Right.
psyops.
I'm
Yes.
very proud to be. I've read all the books about spies in World War II and the psyops, and it's very thrilling to actually be part of it. But the real reason, aside from that it's thrilling, is it's working. And I think that's the thing to emphasize to people is, we all make financial contributions, what we can, to the election, because if you're listening to the show, obviously you care. But I think this is a very effective, high value use of campaign dollars. I mean, if for $100,000 you can beam a commercial directly into Trump's head and make him nuts, that's $100,000 very well spent.
And I mean, every day that he's off message is critical. I mean, there are only 69, 70 days left, and every day you can knock him off his game.
Right.
It's like it's basically like, a good hit at the line of scrimmage every day, every play. And that's what we're trying to accomplish. And again, thank you, everyone. We thank you for being so generous with your time. We've run over, and